Dr. Elizabeth Shaw was featured in the film Prometheus as the main protagonist of the film and was the main archaeological expert and a driving reason behind the creation of the Project Prometheus by Wayland Industries. Her aspirations led her to the stars, and unfortunately, they decided to keep her there too. As a scientist and an archaeologist, Dr. Elizabeth Shaw was a very well prepared individual to go out into the world and make new discoveries. She spent most of her time and life trying to increase her knowledge of countless ancient cultures around the Earth. She worked to use more and more techniques, as well as being better trained in advanced medical and forensic science procedures to better help her understand the discoveries she would make throughout the years. Elizabeth Shaw was short with a rather small stature, however this had no effect on her strength, determination, kindness and high moral stance that allowed her to be nearly incorruptible. Shaw was a devout Christian, but she was also very intelligent and didn't allow her religious beliefs to cloud the significance and weight of her scientific discoveries. Supposedly from birth, Shaw had been sterile and had an inability to bear a child. This for Shaw was a devastating blow and something that she carried heavily on her shoulders throughout her life. It's quite possible that her obsession with the creation of man and her engineer gods stem from her own inability to create life. Dr. Elizabeth Shaw was born in 2061 to a British couple. Shortly after her birth, her mother passed away of an unknown disease. This spurred her and her father to move away from their problems and move to South Africa, where her father would continue his work and further his job as a missionary, as that was his and his wife's passion. Shaw spent most of her younger years being brought up by her missionary father, until he too tragically died of disease. The specific disease was actually Ebola, and despite her hardships, she would never lose her faith, and made it her mission to uncover the secrets and mythical origins of humanity and life itself. Shaw eventually became an archaeologist and also gained doctorates in paleontology and human mythology. During her career, she actually fell in love in the form of Dr. Charlie Holloway, a fellow archaeologist that shared her enthusiasm and drive to find answers for some of life's most evasive and mysterious questions. It was in many ways their drive to discover that made the two such a match for each other. She and Holloway travelled the world and researched ancient artifacts, artworks, inscriptions, and many more ancient forms of human communication. Eventually though, something strange began to unveil itself. Multiple cultures, dozens of them actually, some extremely ancient, some recent, some that had had no contact whatsoever with any other civilizations throughout their lifespan, had all depicted giant beings pointing to the sky, and furthermore an array of dots that had begun to be theorized was a set of star constellations. Shaw and Holloway worked for years to uncover more and more evidence for their theory that this was an invitation from the gods to come and meet them, giving us a star map to guide us to them. In the year 2089, during the exploration of the Isle of Skye in Scotland, Shaw along with Holloway discovered yet another star map in a cave painting that was older and predated any other that they had seen before, again depicting giant beings pointing to a star constellation. After this, they had what they needed to make a compelling case to have a funded expedition sent to this star system, Zeta II Reticuli, where laid a single moon, LV223, where laid a single moon capable of supporting life, LV223, in order to gain funding for a manned mission to the site. She did so through the Quiet Eye video message, where she enticed Wayland by appealing to his company's and his own beliefs and motivations, such as the need to answer questions like what happens after death, the meaning of life, and whether we are the only intelligent life in the universe. She explains that all this and more, as well as other technologies and possibly new medical advancements, could also be gained, and requests that they meet in person to further discuss the potential expedition. Wayland eventually takes notice of Shaw's many attempts to contact him, and they indeed meet. And after a lengthy debate between many of the members of the Wayland Company Board of Directors and himself, Wayland, now convinced by Shaw, comes out on top, and the expedition gets a green light, being fully funded and heavily invested in by Wayland himself. Working with Wayland Corp, Shaw assists in the creation of the scientific vessel USCSS Prometheus in order to explore the star map and, in specific, the moon LV-223 as a possible homeworld or meeting place of the engineers. Elizabeth Shaw requested that she be allowed to take part in the expedition for the archaeological, religious, mythological, and historical significance that the site may hold, as well as the opportunity she had to meet her maker. Her request would be met with great positivity by Wayland, as he held many of the same hopes as Shaw did. Shaw and Holloway were both given positions in the crew aboard the expedition and entered their hypersleep chambers, readying themselves for the long journey. Once arriving and awakening from their slumber, Shaw quickly fell sick from the side effects of the long hypersleep. The Prometheus left Earth in the year 2091 and arrived at LV-223 just 2 years later in the year 2093. Shaw and Holloway debriefed their fellow crew members on the expedition, as it had been deemed confidential information due to the massive implications of what they were trying to achieve and discover. After this, Shaw was called with Holloway away to meet with Meredith Vickers, who displayed her great disapproval of this expedition, and that she basically wished for their attempts to fail. After preparing themselves for the hostile environment of LV-223, and more so the temples that they had noticed whilst landing, they begin to explore them. Eventually, Shaw and the others encounter a form of holographic visual recording, and it leads them to a large, fossilized body lying before a large, sealed door. And it appeared that it had been decapitated by this door whilst running from something that was depicted in the holographic recording, but couldn't quite be made out. Soon after, the android that had been brought along on the mission, David, is able to correctly activate the large doorway, and Shaw was able to view and examine, also bag and seal, an alien engineer's head in an airtight bag to take back to their facilities aboard the Prometheus for further study. This was her chance to begin to answer some of the questions she had sought to uncover for years. She stood up to look around the large room that they had entered for the first time, as she had previously been distracted. Large, high-hung walls curved to a roof, with murals scattering their surface. However, as soon as she had noticed them, they had begun to decay. Shaw stated that their presence and opening the door had changed the atmosphere in the room and was causing the murals to fade rapidly. After a warning that there would be a large storm soon, Shaw and the rest of the crew decided to come back the next morning. Shaw, her specimen, and the rest of the crew leave the temple and head back to the ship. However, on their way, Shaw is ripped from her footing by the terrible strength of the winds during the recently arriving storm. She left her exocraft because the engineer head that she had bagged had fallen away from the exocraft and was now being whisked away by the weather. She ran out to grab hold of it and is saved by a combination of efforts by both Holloway and David as they work to get her safely aboard. After Holloway scolds her for her recklessness outside the ship, Shaw and the science team get to work, analysing the engineer's head. They soon learned the external structure they saw was actually some sort of exosuit, and underneath lie a very human-like creature. After tampering with the head to trick its nervous system into believing it was alive, they view rapid growth of new tissue and cells as the head begins to swell before exploding in the containment chamber. Despite the shock of this, Shaw is able to use the DNA samples taken previously and came to the conclusion that the engineers created humans and that we came directly from their genetic code. After going back to Holloway and informing him of the news, in the heat of the moment, Holloway causes Shaw to become distressed when he marks off that creating life now seemed easy and that anyone could do it. In doing so, he neglected Shaw's feelings about her own inability to conceive and carry a child. He quickly apologizes and the two make love. However, previously, the devious android David had infected Holloway with the black pathogen chemical they had found in the headroom of the engineered temple. This caused a mutated form of Holloway's sperm to transmit into and infect Shaw. Later the next day, they returned to the temple in order to find 2 crew members that had been trapped there for the night. But this doesn't last very long, as Holloway becomes increasingly sickened and they find one of the 2 crew members dead in the headroom. They hightail it back to the Prometheus, however Holloway is refused entry as he was beginning a round of horrible mutations and was becoming extremely ill. He is eventually put down by Meredith Vickers, lead company associate on the mission, who feared him spreading a possible infection throughout their ship. Shaw passes out from the utter stress of the situation and wakes up aboard the Prometheus, undergoing quarantine procedures from David. Despite her already stressed situation, he then informs her that she is currently 3 months pregnant. She objects completely, knowing that it is impossible that she is pregnant. However, David tells her that it is not exactly a traditional fetus. Shaw begs for David to have it removed, however he instead sedates her. David had obviously planned to return her to Earth in cryostasis and have the creature for further study once they returned. After regaining consciousness, Shaw pretended to be asleep when the other crew tried to move her into stasis. As they did, she quickly knocked them out and escapes to the ship's medical pod, where she begins to enact the process to remove the foreign object from her reproductive system. The whole time between the quarantine and the pod, she could feel the creature growing and pulsating heavily and causing heavy, immense pressure and pain. After a short and brutal conscious surgery procedure, Shaw is able to have the creature removed and she views it for the first time. Her firstborn child, that is a strange creature that resembles some sort of octopus squid-like creature. Shortly after this embryo had emerged, it began to violently thrash about, attempting to attack its mother. Shaw is able to finish the procedure, having herself stapled back up and escaping the pod before she is attacked. Whilst trapped by the medical claw, the creature suffers through a decontamination procedure enacted by Shaw, while she runs as far away from that creature as she can. As she gets further and further, she feels more and more pain, as she eventually collapses in front of a red door, which just happened to be the private cryostasis tube room. Falling to her knees, she looks up to see an elderly Peter Wayland, who is revealed to have been secretly aboard the ship the entire time. As to allow him to come and meet with the engineers in order to seek the gift of eternal life, knowing that if anyone could achieve this, it would have to be them. Shaw warns him that the engineers aren't exactly what they thought they were, and that they were all dead anyway. David, however, explains that he had discovered a sole surviving engineer in stasis within the temple. ignoring her warnings about the engineer and how they had most likely built this place in order to wipe humanity out with the black pathogen mutagen, the same one that had just killed Holloway. They still decide to venture anyway, and reluctantly Shaw agrees to come along. Just before they leave for the temple, Shaw meets with the captain of the Prometheus, Captain Yannick. He basically agrees that LV-223 was an engineer's weapons facility, and that all the engineers were here to do was to keep it away from their own home world, and they didn't want these weapons to turn against them. Something that proved very smart, as LV-223 did eventually fall. Shaw and Yannick ensure that each other know that they can't allow any of this pathogen to get back to Earth, and they will both do what they have to ensure that that does not happen. Once in the stasis room, along with Wayland, David, and a few other crew members, David activates the awakening sequence and revives the engineer. The colossal being arises to stand feet above everyone else in the room, gazing out and observing his new strange surroundings. Shaw attempted to question the engineer about why they now wish to destroy humanity after creating us, but is quickly silenced by one of the security officers by order of Wayland. The engineer, fed up with this situation, decapitates David and uses the fractured head to break Wayland's skull, effectively killing him, and he goes on to kill the other crew members one by one. Shaw quickly picks herself up from her knees and begins to bolt out of the temple. Once she reaches the surface of the ground, it begins to shift and move below her, as if it was about to reveal something. And it was, as it was revealed that it was really a rooftop opening to a massive underground chamber housing an engineer spacecraft. As the ship rises and begins and prepares to head to Earth to finish what the engineers started 2,000 years ago and to wipe out humanity, Shaw pleads with Yannick to stop the ship by any means necessary, as if it escapes, there won't be any Earth to go back to. Shaw watches from below as a lifeboat from the Prometheus and a single life pod jettisons from the Prometheus, containing Meredith Vickers, whilst Captain Yannick and the remaining crew sacrifice their lives in order to bring down the engineer's juggernaut. The Prometheus is destroyed and the juggernaut begins, now disabled, falling to the surface once again. Vickers and Shaw make a sprint to get out of the way of the falling debris. However, Vickers is crushed whilst Shaw is able to barely survive the same fate. After this chaos, Shaw heads to the lifeboat, which possesses enough supplies to survive for 2 years. However, once arriving, the decapitated head of David contacts Shaw through a radio transmission that the engineer had survived the crash and was now coming for her. Shaw notices that the monstrosity of a child that she had sealed in the medpod room of the life pod had now grown to a ridiculous size. The engineer shortly arrives, filled with rage at its human child. However, before the being can kill Shaw, she quickly opens the door to the medpod room and releases the terrifyingly large, tentacled monster that quickly overpowered the engineer and allowed Shaw to escape. With all the events of the mission being stacked up one after the other, Shaw drops to the ground outside the life pod. She begins to cry and cry and cry. She reaches out to Charlie Holloway and says that she can't do it anymore. Again, David contacts her and states that if she can assist him, he can assist both of them in helping them escape this world by commandeering another one of the engineer's ships hidden underground. David promises that he will be able to return Shaw to Earth. Shaw refuses. Instead, she requests that they instead head for the engineer's homeworld. Shaw had begun this mission to get answers, and she would not rest now until she had those questions answered. Specifically, why the engineers would create humanity only to wish to destroy it now. She had already lost too much to not fulfill her and Holloway's work. After obtaining David's head and body from the wreck of the Prometheus and transporting them to the next engineer's ship, the two take off, and Shaw records a final report of the vessel Prometheus, explaining that the ship and all of its crew had perished, and that anyone listening had best stay away from LV-223, and that only death remained here, and waited to take others. David assists Shaw to launch and fly the ship into orbit, and once there, Shaw and David spend quite a bit of time together. Shaw eventually repairs the damage done to David as best as she could, and he is eventually able to have his head and body reconnected, which made the navigation of the vessel much easier. They set a course for the engineer's homeworld known as Paradise, and Shaw prepared to finally get the answers she had desired so badly. David places her in stasis for the months-long journey, and continued around the ship on his own. Eventually they reach Paradise, however everything took a turn for the worst, as David, for self-righteous reasons, wiped out the engineer population using their own pathogenic weapons in the cargo hull of the ship, and proceeded to kill Shaw. Now, it's uncertain how and when this occurred, but we do have some sort of explanation as to why David did so. He wished to create his own life. He saw the engineers, humanity, and everything under them as a form of abomination, mistakes, and so he would need organic, non-botanical materials to do so. And seeing as though he had just wiped out the engineers, as he had developed a hatred for them, he had only one creature left, and that was Shaw. He basically used Shaw's body to create new life from her, as there was no other usable engineer materials left over after he destroyed them. And so this comes the disappointing and unsatisfying end to Dr. Elizabeth Shaw. She was never able to find the answers which she desired so dearly, and instead she was used as a lab rat in David's twisted work to attempt to recreate a long-dead creature from the engineer's archives on Paradise. However, in a poetic way, Shaw did eventually become a mother. She became mother to life, however I doubt that it was the kind that she had in mind. But what did you guys think of this video, and what other ones would you guys like to see? If you have any ideas or have any questions you would like answered, please meet me down in the comments. If you did enjoy the video, please leave a like and go check out Project ACHERON on Twitter and Discord. And if you did want to support me further, you can become a patron where you can get access to the early and behind the scenes content, as well as the monthly and Alien Day giveaways, as well as a series of patron-only Project ACHERON engraved items. I hope you guys did enjoy the video, and for now, this is Project ACHERON signing off.